An assistant professor at Washington State University is making history for the college. Holly Menino spoke with the school's first faculty member selected to the prestigious Andrew Carnegie Fellows program.
Joining me now is assistant professor at the Edward R. Murrow School of Communications at Washington State University, Dr. Jen Henrichsen. She's also a Carnegie Fellow, the first in WSU's history. We're going to get to that in just a moment, but Dr. Henrichsen, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you. Tell me about the research you've been doing at WSU.
Absolutely. So over the last year, we conducted a survey and interviews with a lot of different news organizations across the state to try to map the local news ecosystem. And we found out of 1,000 outlets that we identified that only 353 were actually engaging in original journalistic reporting that was also locally relevant and regularly updated. And so what we found was a local news crisis in Washington State, which kind of mirrors a crisis that's affecting the nation.
Yeah, dive a little bit more into Washington State's local news ecosystem. How healthy are we?
Yes, well, we are struggling a little bit. So what we found too was that a lot of the news organizations are operating with really small budgets, like $250,000 a year, which does not allow for a lot of reporting. And we also found that quite a few news outlets don't have a lot of staff, like editorial staff. And so they're trying to do more with less, or they have to do more with less. And so they're actually relying on freelancers and volunteers in a lot of cases, which means that editors have to make really hard decisions. Do you send your reporter to the school board, or do you send your reporter to investigate corruption? And so what we're finding is that there's increased precarity facing news organizations across Washington State. And we even found 2 news deserts, which basically, in 2 counties, which basically means that those counties don't have any viable local news available to their citizens, which is a big problem. If we think about the importance of local news to civic life, we know that it's incredibly important to have information that allows us to make decisions about our daily lives. Your viewers might remember the Seattle Public Schools decision to close, or at least initially to close 20 elementary schools. Without local news focusing in on that issue, I don't know if there would have been an outcry from parents. And parents at the same time were very shocked when that announcement came forward. At the same time, we know that fires affect the state on the east side and the west side, and yet it's really hard, especially if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of news, to know where that wildfire is. So I've literally had to step outside of my front door, look around, I smell smoke, and I'm trying to figure out where is that fire. So just the importance of local news cannot be overestimated. It's just really crucial for us.
I mean, and I'm clearly in the local news business, and I'm in this profession because I believe in its importance and our mission, especially right here at KOMO and ARC Seattle. Tell me why else, from your perspective, you're the expert, why else local news is so important to communities?
Well, local news is really important in part because it provides cohesion for society. And so you want to know as an individual or as a parent, as a citizen, what is happening in your community. Well, local journalists are the ones who are figuring that out for you. And so if you don't have local news, how are you supposed to know about these critical issues, whether it's education, whether it's wildfires, whether it's, what your county officials are up to, right? And we also know that civic participation aligns with local news. So local news allows for more engagement, civic engagement. It allows for increased cohesion in societies. And it's just incredibly important for communities because communities are the fabric of democracy. And we do live in a democracy, although it's being challenged.
And that's something we'll get to in a minute, because that's some of your latest research too, what you're focusing on. I want to talk about what WSU has been doing, though, to improve local news. They created a fellowship program where they selected newsrooms across the state. They placed fellows in there. Full disclosure, I was on that selection committee to help select some of those newsrooms. Talk about that project, though, and its importance.
Absolutely. So the Murrow News Fellowship Program is run by Ben Shores, who's my chair at the Department of Journalism and Media Production at WSU. And this program is a really important project in many ways, and because it places journalists, aspiring, usually early career journalists, in news outlets across the state to report on civic affairs, which is incredibly important for communities, especially underserved communities that might not be getting that information. And so there's sort of a matchmaking process that happens where the news organization applies and then a fellow applies, and Murrow decides who goes where. And it's resulted in more than 1,000 stories already, and the content is also allowed, or like is under Creative Commons, and so is able to be shared, which is really important for the state, especially since we're facing this precarity where there's not as many news organizations as there have been in the past, and news organizations that do exist are facing a lot of resource challenges. So it's a really cool program, and the hope is that it just keeps going in perpetuity because of the importance of actually having local reporters in these places that are underserved. Perception of journalism is a huge issue. In many ways, people are not understanding the importance of journalism, and yet it's vital to their everyday lives, and they don't necessarily know that or understand that. And it's really important that journalism is seen as a public good, that is infrastructure, like our roads, like water, to our daily lives. And it needs maintenance, it needs upkeep, it needs resources. And so we need to have a reorientation as a society to the importance of journalism so that we can ensure that it is sustainable and to ensure that it thrives.
And its true mission.
Yes.
Which is true information to keep you safe.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, how else are you supposed to know what's happening in your community? Local journalism is essential for understanding that. And the other aspect of that is it's factual, right? It's neutral. It is providing you guidance and information to make sure that you can carry out these actions in your daily lives. And too often what we're seeing now is that individuals want information to be free. They expect information to be free, right? Especially with the advent of the internet. A lot of journalists or a lot of individuals are getting their information from social media platforms. They're not checking the veracity of that information. They don't know the source behind that information. And that's a huge problem because you don't know if the information you're obtaining and you're digesting is actually true. And yet you're sharing it with your family members. And so the contribution of that to society can be very detrimental in that you might be spreading misinformation, information that's not true that you're sharing thinking it's true. Right? So we really need to have a better understanding of the value of local journalism and then invest in that.
And that includes investing in journalists.
Yes.
You also have to have good journalists to make sure you're getting a fair and balanced story and covering it from all angles. There's not always just two, there can be multiple.
Absolutely. So investment in journalists is incredibly important. I'm actually leading a working group on journalistic infrastructure for the Local News Impact Consortium, which is funded by the Knight Foundation. And we're trying to understand across the nation how to identify journalistic employment, how to determine, is it decreasing significantly? We think, of course, it is. How do we measure that more consistently across states? Because we know that you have to have reporters in the newsrooms in order to have good information coming out of those organizations. And yet what we're seeing, especially with this new report, is that news organizations are having to do more with less. So we don't have a lot of editorial staff in news organizations anymore. And that is a problem for information and also for, the reliance on precarious laborers, right? So volunteers and freelancers, and they can do good work. But what does that mean about the longevity, really, of that news organization or the intellectual knowledge of that news organization?
We got to get to, you're a Carnegie Fellow,
Okay.
the first ever in WSU's history. What does that mean for you to achieve something like this?
I am incredibly grateful for the Carnegie. It's a huge honor. It's one of the highest honors in my field, in social sciences and humanities. And what it means is that I have 2 years of funding and support to carry out a project that examines how local journalism can increase civic engagement and reduce political polarization.
And so with that comes some funding for research. Focus in on your funding or on your research for us. What are you going to specifically be focusing on, and how do you do this?
Sure. So it's multi-stage. It's over 2 years. So the first element of it is to do a content analysis of more than 1,000 fellows' stories. So I'm looking specifically at that Murrow News Fellowship Program to try to see, okay, to what extent are the fellows reporting on critical information needs? Because we know from the scholarship that critical information needs are incredibly important for community health and civic health. And so it's looking at what is covered there, and then it's also interviewing those journalists, interviewing their editors, and then also conducting a survey to better understand how subscribers to these different outlets might be motivated to engage more in their communities in a civic way. And then also to analyze how subscribers may be more likely to, trust media. So I'm looking at emotional trust and also how that may relate to effective polarization.
Oh, congratulations to you. And we look forward to checking in with you in 2 years to see what your research finds, though, and maybe checking in along the way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Jen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love that they're dedicating so much resource and time to looking at local journalism and how it is perceived, because it is so important.
It is.
And it's changing a lot, too.
It is. It matters. It matters. And it's, stories of accountability, what's happening in your community, all those really important conversations on some really important issues.
Yep.
It is no secret that there are cutbacks in everything from radio to television to newspapers. And that's only hurting the communities that those entities serve.
Yeah.
And a lot of journalists are having to do more with less. And that hurts some of the stories that can be told and how many stories can be told. And hopefully there's more resources that are pumped into all those organizations to keep them going strong.
Hopefully, and congrats to the professor, too, for becoming the first Carnegie Fellow there. That's very cool.
Go Cougs.